theoretically be quite a bit easier. I mean, they've already kind of transferred the model to the dairy workers in Vermont, right? So I guess, what are your thoughts on that, Peter?
Well, I'm interested in the produce industry, right?
Uh-huh.
So my questions would be this. Is there anywhere else in the produce industry the same structured buyer agreement that obtains in the Immokalee in the Florida?
Uh-huh. Like the Florida Tomato Growers Exchange, you mean?
Right.
Yeah.
So exactly. It's the strength of your program is this enforcement mechanism with market consequences. Does the structure that you so successfully exploited to achieve that enforcement mechanism actually exist anywhere else in the produce industry?
Right. That's a very good question. Right.
And I'll leave it as a question. I'm not an expert.
Yep.
I just, to the best of my knowledge, it doesn't.
Yeah. No,
but maybe it does, and maybe that becomes the target.
Right.
I think that's one question.
Mm-hmm.
The second question that I would have for them about scalability is just, how shall I say this? Every program makes its choices along the sort of confrontation, collaboration continuum.
Yeah.
Right. And I'm not even going to get into, I think there's a time and a place and blah blah blah. Right.
Mm-hmm.
To me, there is no absolute truth on that.
Yeah.
There's a time and a place. They've chosen very effectively to leverage a confrontational model, which has not endeared them to the industry.
Right.
So, there are certainly buyers who signed up to their agreement. It would be interesting to see whether their buyers would support a scaling strategy.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll just leave that as a question.
Yeah.
So there are things that you can do when you're a major buyer and you're confronted with a very effective grassroots organizing campaign. There are accommodations you can make in your buying practices to satisfy the demands of that at a particular scale.
Mm-hmm.
And then the question becomes, are you ready and willing and able to accommodate those demands, sort of across your produce buy?
Mm-hmm.
So again, just a question.
Yeah, it's a good question.
But a question that I would argue is, some bridges have been burned in that confrontational approach.
Mm-hmm.
So something for them to think about is, is that strategy gonna accelerate their scaling or limit their scaling?
Mm-hmm.
Again, I'm asking questions I'm not going to answer.
Uh-huh.
Then nobody cares what my answer is anyway, right? I just think it's a legit question.
It's a very good question. Yeah.
So, and then I guess the third thing is this. I mean, I don't argue with the investment that's being made because I think, as I said from the outset, I think there's a very effective community organizing model they've established. But is the degree of worker verification, worker involvement that they so rightly are proud of, hinges on that kind of long-term place-based investment.
Right.
Then how do you expand in a cost-effective way?
Mm-hmm.
And who's gonna foot the bill for that?
Yeah.
And what do I know? They may have tapped that funding source, right? And I think that'd be a strong argument to make for, I've worked in, community development for 30 some years, and I'm very, very supportive of place-based local organizing, right? But it takes time and money.
Right.
And, as you rightly said, if there's a real concern about the cost of the FI certification, what's the full cost accounting cost of their food program certification? So
right.
Buyer uptake, costs, and then the sort of just the replicability of a model based on a purchasing agreement that doesn't obtain elsewhere in the industry. I'd say those are some things that they're smart on and they're probably working on them, but those are the obvious questions they'd have to answer.
Right. Peter, what was the first thing you said? Buyer what? Uptake?
Buyer uptake.
Okay,
yeah.
That's what I heard. I just wanted to make sure.
Buyer uptake. Yeah, can they get the buyers to be signed on to the, retail or food service, agreement to work with them to expand the program.
Right. Peter, here's another question that I've kind of been pondering.
Sorry, can I ask one? Can I just say one more thing though?
Sure.
On that, so
yeah.
those are three sort of challenges. Right? We've got EFI's got plenty of challenges. We're having challenges, bad thing. But the one thing that I do think is really important in this question around can they scale within the industry is, they've done a great job of getting consumers on their side. They've done a good job of getting the buyers on their side for what they've accomplished so far. Again, if they can expand that, great. They have really pissed off the grower community.
Yeah.
In my world, I hear an awful lot about fair trade, and sort of to your point, right? Why are you guys better than fair trade? And why do you cost more and all that stuff?
Mm-hmm.
No grower ever asks about whether they should explore CIW certification as a way to demonstrate.
Mm-hmm.
That's the price you pay, I think, for the competition approach. I think that's where the bridges got burned.
So could you conceivably see Costco ever getting on board with CIW? I mean, they're very popular right now. They are kind of the darling of the.
Yeah, I couldn't answer that question.
Yeah.
I honestly couldn't. I sure wouldn't want to. No, my issue is not so much, the retail. I mean, these guys, CIW's built relationships with retailers, right? I assume that they're having those conversations with the retailers about whether the retailers will encourage their suppliers to get involved.
Mm-hmm.
I just think that'll be a heavy lift. I mean, goodness knows, as you well know, EFI is a heavy lift because that's our UFW association, right?
Yeah.
I think their lift might even be a heavier one.
Yeah. Peter, what do you think about, them, the worker-driven social responsibility term? What are your thoughts about that? And what are your thoughts about that, in relation to EFI, for example? I mean, they've been using it very successfully, I think. Do you think it's, an accurate term? Do you think and it kind of, I guess the way I interpret it is that CIW is worker-driven social responsibility, and therefore EFI is not worker-driven social responsibility. Do you have any thoughts about that?
Yeah. You hear about this an awful lot.
Yeah.
So, again, I haven't been close to their model for years to know. But let's just take them at their word that they've sort of stuck a stake in the ground and said it's not authentic if it's not fully worker verified.
Right.
And that is what they say.
Mm-hmm.
CIW, how shall I say this gently, is not shy about pointing out what they see to be the limitations of EFI's model.
Right.
So I guess I would ask the question, what is the most effective and sustainable ongoing verification mechanism for compliance with higher standards, right? Mm-hmm. We can all agree on higher standards, right? Mm-hmm. So what's the most effective verification mechanism? And they stuck a stake in the ground and said, if it's not fully worker-led, and exclusively worker-led, then it's not authentic.
Yeah.
And EFI would say, okay, I mean, I've come out of that world. I understand that argument. That's, maybe you're right. Maybe you're not. Maybe a worker management collaborative approach is actually more sustainable, mm-hmm. more replicable, more value creating over the long term than mm-hmm. a purely worker-led model.
Yeah.
And, I would say at this point that the jury's out on that. I think to say if it's not fully worker-led, then it's not real is an ideological position rather than an empirical position. Mm-hmm. And I think what EFI would say is very transparently, we're trying to build collaboration, right? We think there's a whole greater than the sum of the parts. we're trying to create mechanisms that bring those parts together with a commitment to value creation on all sides.